So the first lesson we had together was looking at our revision of functionalist perspectives of criminal and deviant behaviours. Your first task was to consider Durkheim, Hershey and Merton's theory about why people commit criminal and deviant acts. Looking at the grade boundaries, we looked at grade E to D being the functionalist explanations, so how they explain why criminal and deviant behaviours occur. We then looked at explaining using examples of how and why these explanations can demonstrate continued social order or lack of. And then the A to A style will be thinking about the evaluation, looking at the strengths and limitations of the theory, and then using alternative perspectives to illustrate supporting and opposing points. It was your task to present these to the class, and then we recapped them. So we talked about how functionalist theories see dysfunction as functional, and we talked about the manifest and latent functions of crime, where the manifest function is a visible or clear reason why someone would commit criminal or deviant acts. So for instance, in this case, to steal a car is to get a car and achieve a car and have that material good in front of you to use. It might even be to get status from your friends. The latent function is the hidden function, so usually the thing that we learn from seeing others act in a criminal or deviant way. It can be remembered as the manifest being the obvious function, you get a free car, it's pre-planned, you look cool, or the latent, which is hidden, where there's a public search for criminal punishment. People see thieves as being punished. They see it as an undesirable act and therefore don't commit that act themselves. It reinforces the fact that car crime is wrong, especially when we see public punishment, and that's why dysfunction can be functional according to Durkheim and functionalists. So then we talked about the different manifest and latent functions of these different acts. There is always an obvious reason why we act in a particular way. However, sometimes the latent reason can influence the rest of society, and that is how functionalists explain dysfunction. So for instance, if we take eating cheese, we eat cheese because we like cheese, we're hungry, we might have a calcium deficiency. However, the latent function could be that it could cause us to become overweight, it might make us feel sick, and so on. So we can see the obvious reason and then like the hidden reason why we behave in the way that we do, and how others can perhaps learn from our mistakes that we may make. We talked about Hershey. You did some presentations on how Hershey talks about attachments to society, and I illustrated it with this diagram here. Crime and deviance is functional. We have a collective conscience. We all collectively disapprove about certain things to different extremes, whether they be simply deviant or criminal. We talk about reinforcement, how where we may have informal reinforcement like our parents and our friends either approving or disapproving of our actions, but then formal control mechanisms such as the police and the judicial system. Within that attachment to society, we also see dysfunctional behaviour, where there may be too much attachment or too much involvement in groups where perhaps deviance is seen as acceptable, or too little attachment within society where we don't really have anyone to look up to or to control us. You might see criminal and deviant acts as the norm, as acceptable as the usual thing, because no one seems to know the rules on what's acceptable. We discussed the strengths and weaknesses of this theory. We said how the new right perspective looks at individual success, so where people want something for themselves, they may commit property crime. It's about personal gain, and that's been well explained by functionalist theory or Durkheim's theory. Reiner also says that it does explain why working class crime is more prominent. So as a Marxist perspective, looking at class, it explains that if people don't have much in a working class background, they would look to achieve that through other means. And then we can also see how crime can be functional. So through anarchy and revolution, we can see positive change. So people who were working towards the civil rights campaigns like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they were all working illegally because they went against the law and they were causing anarchy, but something positive came at the end, and that was the end of segregation and apartheid. However, Taylor argues that power relationships have been overlooked. We don't consider in functionalist theory why the people make the rules, that make those rules. So they're often people of status, and Taylor is concerned about how this can be manipulative to people. It might be part of the ideology that undermines working class values. And Taylor's from a Marxist perspective. It doesn't also understand why. It helps us to understand why only certain people are criminal, why only certain individuals choose to commit criminal and deviant acts. And then Valier also says that it doesn't consider how different goals are aspired to at any one time. So some people might have a goal of stealing a car, others might have a goal of being successful lawyers, and so on. But the goals might not be universal. Some people might have a goal of being able to paint a door, or mow a lawn, or climb a tree. And so as an interpretivist perspective from a social action theory, we can see problems with the theory that Durkheim presents. We then reviewed Merton's strain theory, talking about the reasons why people commit criminal and deviant acts. Some people conform. They want to adhere to the values of society and are part of the collective consciousness that we see. So don't really commit that much crime. They might be deviant but not really criminal. We see the innovators who accept goals and success criteria but then may use creative means to succeed. So things like crime, and it can explain white-collar crime. We see ritualization, where we see subcultural groups being formed. They create their own norms and values, which may not tie in with the collective consciousness and the social cohesiveness that Durkheim celebrates. And then we have retreatists who reject norms and values. They may be homeless, they may be addicted to drugs, they can't achieve the norms and values of society that is the majority. And then we have the rebellion. These are the revolutionary people, the people who look to social change or look for social change, and that is an example of the civil rights movement, where people arguing that we should have equality were actually going against the law at the time, but the changes occurred as a result of their criminal acts and society became better. We evaluated Merton's theory in the same way that we evaluated the functionalist theory, and then we looked at the different models of subcultural theory, which we'll come on to in the next session.